Well, we live in an age where our ideas about identity, about what makes you, you, are in flux. It's never been easier to adopt a new identity, even a new gender. But what about your race? I'm not talking about someone white speaking with a Jamaican patois. I mean to physically change race. Oli London is 31, was born in Britain as a man. He's a self-styled influencer with hundreds of thousands of fans on sites like TikTok. Oli recently announced that he's now non-binary and wants people to call him they or them. But Oli wants to leave more than his biological sex behind. He wants to change his race, and he's said to have spent more than £100,000 in recent years on 18 separate operations to effect that transition. Eye surgery and lifts to the face, brow and temple. This is how Oli looks. He now identifies not only as non-binary, but Korean. Oli says his idol is a Korean pop star from a band called BTS. Because he's an influencer, Oli London is in the business of talking about himself, which allows us to test the validity of beliefs he's clearly quite keen to share with many others. Many of his statements are demonstrably doolally. He says, for instance, "I'm Korean. This is who I am. It's in my DNA." No, Oli, you may feel Korean, but your DNA, as a matter of scientific and empirical fact, is not. Oli says, "I've been trapped in the wrong body for 8 years, and that's the worst feeling in the world." No, Oli, there are far worse feelings in life than feeling Korean inside a British body. Talk to someone who's lost a child or a spouse, for instance. Here he is, in his own words.
The first time in my life I feel beautiful. You know, I'm looking in the mirror and I love the way I look and feel happy. And I hope people can respect my decision. It's a very tough decision to come out this way. But I am coming out as non-binary. I don't feel I identify as male or female. I just feel like I'm just in the middle. And my pronouns are they, them, Korean, Jimin. Because I know a lot of people don't understand me, but I do identify as Korean. And I do look Korean now. I do feel Korean. I don't identify as British, so please don't refer to me, any media or anyone online, as British, because I identify as Korean. That's just my culture. That's my home country. That's exactly how I look now.
Well, Oli told Sky News that since he'd announced his new race, he'd been on the receiving end of cruel comments. And Oli has. From Koreans who accuse him of, yes, you guessed it, our old friend cultural appropriation. He says he's been bullied online. I say when anyone seeks to persuade others that they are wrong, they forfeit protection from criticism. I repeat, Oli London is an influencer, and as such, we have a right to pass his words. For what it's worth, I couldn't care less what Oli London does. Many of you may feel the same way, I suspect. If we apply, though, the harm principle, he's not harming anyone. Some people may feel Oli's harming himself, however. If he wants to spend a six-figure sum on cosmetic surgery, that is Oli's choice. But as John Donne, the poet, nearly said 400 years ago, no person is an island unto themselves. You may think Oli London isn't worthy of serious consideration. You may think him freakish. But for his hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok, including at least one of my daughters, he is a new type of celebrity role model. But he's definitely not Korean. Andrew Doyle, our cultural commentator and commentator on many things besides, is with me still here in the studio. I don't know how to approach this.
It's a very tricky one. There's even been people online sort of speculating, you know, is this some kind of satirical hoax? Because it does bear the hallmarks of, well, there was a very popular satirical character on Twitter called Godfrey Elfwick, who claimed to be born in the wrong skin, and this was about 4 or 5 years ago, and even got the hashtag trending, hashtag wrong skin. So it feels like this could be satirical, but if it is, the level of commitment is out of this world. You know, all that money, the physical pain, presumably, that you're going through to be the operation. So I don't think it is. So
and there's precedence, aren't there? We've seen this before. We've seen things that you just thought were simply farcical, impossible. There was a Dutchman a few years ago who said, look, I don't feel 69.
Yeah.
I feel 49. I want the law to recognise that. And he went to the courts. He lost, but he tried.
Oh, there have been people who identify as children. And, you know, this is the logical endpoint of identity politics in its current format, is that anyone can ultimately identify as anything they want. And actually, I take the liberal perspective on this, which is I think Oli London should be able to identify however he likes. I have absolutely no problem with that, and I think he should use
He
whatever...
wants you to call him Korean.
Yeah, but I'm not going to. But he has the right to call himself Korean, and in fact, he has the right to ask others to do so. I'm completely of the liberal approach on this. It's when you start imposing those values on someone else that I think there's a real problem. But this is where the obsession with identity gets us. We saw an early example of this with Rachel Dolezal, who was the head of the NAACP, which is an American black civil rights organisation. But the thing is, she wasn't black. Now, this is going back a few years now, and it was discovered that she was completely white. There are photographs of her as a child. She has no black ancestry or anything like that, and yet she darkened her skin and changed her hair in order to create the appearance that she was black. But she's written a book about this, saying that she's always felt black and that she is black, and that just because she doesn't come from a black family, that doesn't mean that she isn't. In other words, that race is about identity rather than any kind of biological reality. And of course, this bears resemblance with the trans debate. Within the trans debate, there are activists who believe in this idea of a gender identity, an innate thing within. Helen Joyce, in her book Trans, it's a recent book, describes it or likens it to a kind of sexed soul, something that you just innately are that is beyond. But of course, most people don't feel that way. So by all means, anyone can say, I'm non-binary, you should use the pronouns they, them. But no one is obliged to use a plural pronoun as a singular if they don't want to.
Let's assume this isn't a hoax. Let's take this, no pun intended, at face
I don't think it probably
value.
isn't.
OK, at face value.
Yeah.
It's not a hoax. What we see here are competing virtues, don't we?
Yeah.
So suddenly he announces he's Korean, and he has Korean critics saying, how dare you culturally appropriate our Koreanness? And we are disappearing down a deep and dark rabbit hole at this point, aren't we?
Well, of course, and it's just something that is we recur to this debate about identity again and again. Why is it that someone should feel that assuming an identity different to themselves is something that would be positive? I suppose we could endlessly speculate about motives. Is it possible that he authentically feels as though he is Korean, that he's so obsessed with this boy band, this K-pop boy band, that he feels that level of identity is something that he has to reify somehow through surgery, in this case? I mean, this is an extreme way to go. I mean, there have always been people who have borrowed from other cultures and tried to inhabit other cultural types. But to go to this length, this is something unprecedented. I haven't seen anything quite like this before.
And I wonder, it does feel like something new under the sun, and I just wonder, and you're absolutely right to caution and hesitate before we leap in and say absolutely with conviction this is true, because there is a commercial imperative here, isn't there?
Yeah.
I don't know what you earn as an influencer on TikTok with hundreds of thousands of followers.
Who knows?
But he can afford, one thing we can say with confidence, he can clearly afford to pay for some plastic surgery, and that ain't cheap.
Yes.
So we've got this commercial imperative, there's money involved, and that might just mean that we're being had.
Oh, I mean, you could absolutely say that it's to do with money. It could also be an extreme form of narcissism. I mean, look at the extent of the attention that he's now receiving. It's undeniable. And I have to say, I mean, a lot of the influencer generation they certainly give the impression of being extreme narcissists, don't they? It's all very much about them, about how they commodify themselves on social media, how many clicks they get, how many likes they get, and that does, as we know, have a physiological effect, and it gives you a boost, the endorphins and the rest of it. I'm not a scientist, as you can tell, but we could speculate for hours. I don't know, and ultimately that's why I return to the liberal position, which is I can never know why he's doing this, but I respect his right to do whatever he wants to his own body and to use whatever language he wants, but I don't think anyone else should be obliged to go along with it, because it is just fantastical.